So it's week 4 of this particular forum, Made in the Image of God, Respecting the Dignity of LGBTQIA plus people. I have been practicing and I still didn't get it. And it's week 4 of our Democracy, Values, and 2020 election. So thank you all for joining with us again. And I will remind you that this will be recorded so that you can go back and watch it later on, or if people could not join us this morning, you can let us know. We believe people of faith are called to celebrate the presence of LGBTQIA plus people in our congregations and communities and society at large. That we're called to help create new understandings of sexual and gender diversity and promote justice for the LGBTQIA plus people in all areas of life. And so we're glad to have guests with us this morning that Sue will introduce in just a minute. Let's open as we always do in prayer. Loving God, source of all creation, you created us as a diverse people in diverse communities. You teach us that diversity, that it's a blessing, and invite us to come to know one another. So help us to embody your teachings in our lives and our community. Guide and strengthen us as we seek to answer your call to resist all forms of injustice. We lament that too often the lives, rights, and freedoms of LGBTQIA plus people have not been valued in our communities and in our society. Guide our community toward an enduring justice. Grant us the courage to reach out to those who have been harmed by religion. Bless us as we seek to co-create and live in a world where people are free from injustice, violence, and discrimination. Amen. Sue?
Thank you. So I have the pleasure of introducing 2 of our most favorite people coming to us live from Vilas, North Carolina, which is a suburb of Boone, North Carolina, the big metropolis of Boone. Clarinda Choice and Liz Getman. And Clarinda is the Assistant Director of Campus Activities and Clubs and Organizations at Appalachian State University. She received her education at Eckerd College, where she received a bachelor's in communication, and she earned her Master of Education in Student Personnel and Higher Education from the University of Florida. Previously, she worked in student activities at Santa Fe College in Gainesville, Florida, where she coordinated student and cultural events, including Black History Month, LGBTQ plus Pride and Awareness, and Hispanic Heritage Month. Clarinda is passionate about mentoring students, creating community among diverse populations, uplifting marginalized voices, and empowering others to pursue their goals and talents. And then Liz, who, yes, is related to us, our daughter, is a content creator, teacher, and community builder who splits her time between social media management and teaching yoga and meditation. In non-COVID times, she leads retreats in the United States and abroad, and was also the host and executive producer of the podcast Beyond Asana. As a digital creator, Liz works with clients dedicated to creating social change and uplifting the collective good. She studied journalism, Spanish, and Italian at Ithaca College and received her master's degree in Latin American Studies with specializations in gender and development from the University of Florida. Her goal in all she does is to work for justice, peace, and equity for all. So thank you both for joining us this morning, Clarinda and Liz.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely.
So in order to ensure that LGBTQIA plus people are treated with dignity, we need to know who they are. And language is always evolving, including within the LGBTQIA plus community. So I wondered if, before we share a little bit around the issues of the election and voting, if you could help us understand the meaning of the initials, as well as what binary, non-binary, cisgender, and gender neutral mean.
Absolutely. So thank you for that. That was a great introduction as well. So a lot of you may be familiar with some of the acronym LGBTQIA+. The L standing for lesbian, G for gay, B for bisexual, T for transgender, Q for queer or questioning, I for intersect, and A for asexual. I think a lot of us are familiar. Please let me know if you're not familiar. I can go over lesbian, gay, and bisexual, but we're gonna start with transgender. And so transgender is also an umbrella term for people whose gender identity or expression is different from the cultural expectations based on the sex they were assigned at birth. So being transgender does not imply any specific sexual assignment at birth. Therefore, transgender people may identify as straight, gay, lesbian, bisexual, queer, gender nonconforming, and or gender neutral. And queer also can be questioning. The Q could be for questioning, which is any individuals who don't necessarily identify with any like male or female or anything like that. But also questioning could be people who are still like kind of exploring what their gender identity is. Also, again, queer is an umbrella term for the gay community, which I think we'll get into more detail about as well. I have a video for you later. And intersect, which is one that I wasn't very familiar with, but I've learned a lot more about in the past year. But that's also another umbrella term used to describe the wide range of natural and bodily chromosomal variations. So in some cases, these traits are visible at birth, and others, they aren't even apparent until after puberty. And the last one that was kind of new for me as well was asexual, which is the lack of sexual attraction or desire for other people as a whole. But that can go even deeper, whereas there's a spectrum to that as well, meaning like you may not necessarily be sexually attracted to someone until after like a long connection. So these things could mean like, okay, well, I'm not really into this person, whether they're male or female, but after getting to know them for so on years, and maybe I'm more interested in exploring a sexual connection with that person.
So non-binary is an adjective describing a person who does not identify exclusively as a man or a woman. Non-binary people aren't confused about their gender identity or following a new fad. And it's nothing new. So it's a new term somewhat in our society, but actually non-binary identities in other societies and cultures have been recognized for millennia for a long time. Cisgender, again, is more of a new term in our society, and it's often abbreviated just as cis. So you might see a cisgender male or cisgender female, cisgender man, cisgender woman. And it's a term for people whose gender identity matches their sex assigned at birth. So for example, somebody who identifies as a woman and was assigned female at birth is a cisgender woman. So I would be a cisgender woman. And gender neutrality, again, somewhat of a new term. It's the idea that policies, language, and other social institutions should avoid distinguishing roles according to people's sex or gender. So, for example, the word policeman and stewardess are gender-specific job titles. So we've gendered that person just by talking about what they do for a living. So there's, we try to be much more gender neutral in the way we say it. So we could say police officer, flight attendant. Other gender-specific terms include actor and actress, and nowadays most people in that profession just use the word actor. And I think in your job you use, what were you saying earlier?
Oh yeah, so like the ombudsman, we now use that term as ombudsperson.
Yeah. So again, it's always evolving. There's always a lot to learn, but as best you can to not just misgender somebody or give them a gender just by what they look like, which again, we'll talk about more. There's definitely a lot of ways to do that.
And also know that this stuff isn't easy. You don't learn it overnight. Like I've been teaching it for some time and I still have to review like, oh yeah, what's that again?
Yeah.
So it takes some time and some intentionality to get it done and think about it.
We have lots of notes here.
So thank you, because you're right. It is a lot to learn, and it's a way of changing some of our thinking. Could you just explain a little bit about why people include their pronouns to describe themselves? And then one other last question, if you could give a description of what intersectionality is.
I was also thinking, maybe you could forward all those terms and definitions to us, and that way we can forward them to other people, because it's quite a bit to take in a short period of time. Thanks.
Okay.
We have a nice like resource list to share
Great.
after this.
Yep. So I'll try to drop it in the chat. But I also already sent it to my mom so she can send it out to y'all afterwards. Yeah. So about pronouns, just like a name, but pronouns can be most important as someone's name. It's the smallest way, but a really important way to acknowledge somebody's identity. We've been conditioned to assume gender based on what people look like, but that's not always the case, as we just talked about with like naming somebody a policeman instead of police officer. And pronouns are really a way to make space and allow people to feel valued and seen. I think, again, it's a relatively new thing in the greater society at large, but I know in Clarinda's profession in academia, they're sort of the leaders in doing this.
Yeah, so in academia, I feel like we are kind of like the pioneers of using and embracing pronouns. I know for a lot of our staff meetings or committee meetings, we go around the room and we introduce ourselves. I might say, hey, I'm Clarinda Choice. I'm the assistant director for campus activities at Appalachian State. My pronouns are she and they. So that's kind of how we would go and introduce ourselves in the beginning of most meetings.
Yeah, so, we're accustomed to he and him, she and her, and I use she and her pronouns, but now we use they and theirs, they, them, theirs often. There's also ze or zers, so that's a relatively new term that we're learning as a gender neutral pronoun. It's also, some people prefer not to use any pronoun at all. So they could be people that fall under the queer umbrella or questioning umbrella, but they prefer to just use their name. So like you would just call me Liz instead of she or her.
I would like to say that that's sometimes easier for me. I work with a variety of students and I don't necessarily know their pronouns right off the bat. So I usually try to learn their names, or I typically use the they pronoun until they tell me how they identify. That way you keep it, very safe.
And it, again, is something to practice. So one of the resources we're going to share is from a different university, and it offers like practice tools. So you can practice saying they instead of, using she or him, or he. Let's see, what else was we going to say? Oh, so we had some ideas too, again, as resources, like for ways to practice this and create a more welcoming environment. So for instance, like we have our pronouns on here in Zoom, so you can put them next to your name. And that's a great way to do this when you're not in person and you're trying to build community and make people feel included. But when you're back in church, I know at my dad's old church, everyone had name tags, right? So what you can do is have your name and then comma and put your pronouns. So again, I would put she, her, hers, or just she and her.
And then also in your email signature, you can also add your pronouns, which again, we typically do in higher education.
Mm-hmm. And so instead of just saying to somebody like, hey, Clarinda, nice to meet you, what are your pronouns, which can feel a little abrasive or aggressive, or maybe people aren't willing to share, what you can do is like say, hi, I'm Liz, and I use she, hers pronouns. And so you can be the one to say it, and then just anticipate that maybe the person will say it back to you. So that's a great way to do it, again, in a way that doesn't maybe feel aggressive.
Mm-hmm. And I would suggest not necessarily asking people randomly for their pronouns. In a lot of ways, that can also out someone, and maybe they're not ready to tell you what their pronouns are, or maybe they're questioning and they don't know what their pronouns are. So again, if you share first, you may be more willing to share theirs. Yeah.
And like Clarinda said earlier, if you mess up, it's okay. We mess up a lot.
All the time.
And, apologize, but try not to over apologize, because then you're putting the onus on that person to be like, no, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. So they're really the ones comforting you. Mm-hmm. So if you misgender someone, apologize, maybe ask for clarification, and then practice. You can practice at home. Yeah.
We answer those?
Intersectionality, Mom, is that next? Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Okay. And then if you want to show your video, and then we'll get into the election types of questions.
All right. No, it's right here. Okay. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about intersectionality. And I don't know if you all are familiar with the reactions, but we can try to use those. So at the bottom of your, the browser, you can click on your reaction. So if you have heard of the term intersectionality, there's a little smiley face at the bottom, and you can put a thumbs up. So if you have heard of it, that's cool. And if not, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it. Awesome. Just to kind of get a show of hands. So intersectionality is a term coined by Professor Kimberly Crenshaw, who's a lawyer as well and a civil rights activist. And this term was used to provide a theoretical framework for the way people, for the way people experience discrimination and privilege differently, depending on their overlapping identities or gender markers. So this term actually highlights the ways in which identity markers do not exist independently and how individuals are disadvantaged or advantaged by multiple sources of oppression at all times. So basically explains how people's identities dictate how individuals and institutions view them and as a result treat them. So for instance, me as a Black queer woman, I have a different experience than Liz as a white queer woman. So I'm going to experience some discrimination because I'm Black, there's racism there. Also, I'm going to experience some homophobia because I'm queer, and maybe even some sexism because I'm a woman as well. So all those layers are going to give me a different experience than someone else.
Yeah, and then it also, as she mentioned, refers to privilege. So, you know, on the flip of that, and not necessarily a positive flip, I'm going to experience more privilege because I'm white, and maybe because I'm more feminine presenting. So we're also going to send a TED Talk link so you can watch a video. I think it's your favorite TED Talk that Kimberly Crenshaw, the person who coined the term. She gives a TED Talk explaining this more if you're interested.
And it's fabulous. It's not very long, but I would suggest anyone looking at it, sharing it, but it really like breaks down the term and the framework in an easy way to understand.
Yeah. So we are going to show a short video around the word queer.
Can I, Liz? Sorry, I'm interrupting, but and I do think it's a great video, but I'm looking at time and thinking that maybe we'll postpone that to the end, or maybe that'll be something that we share in the resources. Because I mean, we could probably spend we could spend weeks talking about all these different things, but I think it was important for understanding the full population that's being impacted by policies and by the election. And so thank you for giving us at least a primer to start with, and we'll share some other resources. So our church has a long history as an open, welcoming congregation. And I thank David Shalott for giving me some background, since my history here is much shorter than others. FNC's march forward on this issue began in 1989 when a man named Vin Harwell became pastor. We had at that time an active LGBT discussion group that met monthly and a number of out members. A few years later, the church was in the national spotlight as a founding member of Covenant Network of Presbyterians, which continues to seek an equity still not fully realized for LGBTQIA+ people. As part of the Covenant Network, FNC publicly stated it would not follow the denomination's ruling that the church could not ordain LGBT elders and deacons. The Rainbow Chorale of Delaware used the church as a performance venue for many years. And we are a member congregation of More Light Presbyterians, which empowers and equips individuals and congregations to live into their welcome for LGBTQIA+ people. Elder Mark Olson is on the national board for More Light Presbyterians. And most recently, the church hosted a Pride Prom in 2019 and a Valentine's Day dance for queer and allied youth earlier this year. In addition to what the church has done in Delaware, Delaware is considered a gay-friendly state, according to an index created at USA Today in June of this year. It's ranked as the 6th friendliest state for LGBTQIA+ residents. In most cases, LGBTQIA people in Delaware enjoy the same legal protections. Non-discrimination laws include housing, employment, and public accommodations. Unfortunately, there isn't a law banning discrimination against LGBTQIA+ youth in foster care placement. But we do, the state allows gender marker updates on both driver's licenses and birth certificates, has banned conversion therapy, and 2017 poll found that the majority of Delaware residents support same-sex marriage, anti-discrimination laws covering sexual orientation and gender identity, and are against allowing businesses to refuse to serve gay and lesbian people due to religious beliefs. So with all that in mind, the church's history and practice currently as being open and welcoming, the state being relatively friendly. I mean, I said that the majority of people are positive, but it's just over 60%. So that means there's quite a few people who are not supportive. But with all those things in mind, why do you think we should be attentive to the needs of the LGBTQIA+ population in terms of the election and the policies surrounding it?
Sure. Well, this could be another hour-long, 100-hour-long talk. You know, I mean, I think, of course, it's a point of human decency, and I think, or dignity. I mean, I think that's the title of this program anyway, dignity for our community. Certainly when we're in Delaware and in the Philadelphia area, we feel much more comfortable than we do here in the pretty rural South. But I mean, if Delaware is a pretty small state, so if you're queer, if you're never going to leave Delaware, then you might be good. But if you leave Delaware, you might have some issues. So for instance, if you come to North Carolina and you're a trans person, you now can use whichever bathroom you like. But you all may be familiar with HB2. There were a lot of rallies and protests around this law in North Carolina years ago. And basically it didn't let people choose which bathroom they wanted to use. So they could be arrested, they could be discriminated against. And it was really controversial for a while. So let's say you're coming from Delaware or another queer-friendly state, but you come here, you're going to face different levels of discrimination. So right now, our governor's up for re-election, Roy Cooper. Roy Cooper reversed a lot of HB2, so offered protections for our community. But if Dan Forest, the new governor in North Carolina, is elected, all of that could be reversed, right? So there might not be more gender neutral bathrooms anymore. App State, for instance, has a ton of gender neutral bathrooms, but those could be done away with. Again, there could be multiple layers of discrimination, and a lot of the protections could be taken away depending on who our new governor is. So, I mean, we're hopeful that we continue to have a Democrat, but we're not sure.
About benefits?
Yeah, and benefits too. You know, so at App State, I could be added to Clarinda's insurance soon, but again, a lot of that could be reversed. It's already difficult enough to show domestic partnership and to be added to each other's benefits, but that could be made even more difficult depending on who our governor is. And other things are happening right now. So if you look at Texas, so I mean, we're talking about the presidential election a lot, right? And especially now with Amy Coney Barrett's potential, with her nomination and all the hearings, you know, we're hearing more about what could happen to LGBTQ+ people. But if you look at, for instance, state elections and what's happening in Texas right now, just a week ago, this started, lawmakers and advocates are rallying against a Texas board that removed protections completely for LGBTQ+ people and also people with disabilities who need social services. So again, if you travel to a different state and you need a social service there, they can say, well, we're not going to help you because you're a lesbian, right? Or because you're trans. Also, local elections matter. So in Philadelphia in 2018, and y'all might be more familiar with this than we were, but a Catholic social service adoption agency wouldn't allow same-sex couples to adopt. The Trump administration ruled they could turn away same-sex couples. On a more positive note, talking about local elections in San Francisco in 2001, that city became the first major jurisdiction to remove exclusions that banned employee access to transgender specific care. So local elections matter. You know, I know that's the case in Delaware too, you know, and I'm from that area, so I follow it pretty closely. But again, in regards to federal laws, you know, if Trump's reelected, he can assign people, pack the courts, as they like to say, or if Biden's elected, can pack the courts. But if we look at Amy Coney Barrett as an example, you can watch in the hearings that she specifically either ignores questions or disregards them based on questions around same-sex marriage, right? And looking at her history, she served for nearly 3 years on the board of private Christian schools that barred admission to children of same-sex parents. You know, so all this matters, and it trickles down to even, you know, your children. Can you adopt children? Where are you going to send your kids to school? Are they going to have healthcare? And so these are the questions, we're considering too. And certainly, speaking of intersectionality, and again, what Clarinda mentioned is all her different layers of identity, all of that could be really impacted as well. Is there anything else you want to say?
No, I think you covered that one very well.
You've talked about the wider threats. Anything you want to share personally about the threats or the hatred or the discrimination that the two of you have experienced?
So yes, we just moved to Vilas from Gainesville, Florida in March. So right when the pandemic hit. So not knowing the area, we had decided to move here to Vilas, which is outside of Boone, which is very rural. I do notice that, of course, my Blackness comes first. So more people know that I'm queer, they see that I'm Black. And so right now, the one thing that comes to mind for me first is all of the racism that I face daily from just going to the grocery store. Sometimes I just don't even want to go to the grocery store simply because I don't know who I'm going to run into. But one thing I can say, I don't know if this is just because of our race, but also they see that two women moved into this home. During our first few days in our house, we're sitting on the porch and our neighbor decides that he wants to basically fold his Confederate flag on the lawn, which to me feels so threatening. And like not knowing the area and seeing all the Trump signs, that alone made me feel like, okay, you're not welcome here. So that was the first message I got within the first 3 days. And so honestly, it was hard for me to even want to hold hands with Liz outside of the house. So basically kind of keeping our distance when we're outside the house, because they already let us know that they saw me and I'm Black and they don't want us here. So just being very mindful and very intentional with how we navigate, the world in this new space as a queer interracial couple.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like we're, especially for her, but we're always looking over our shoulders in a way. I've never been stared at more, I guess. And, even in Gainesville, which is in Florida, and it's more of a rural city, we felt comfortable holding hands. We felt comfortable going out to clubs, but in Delaware, we feel much more comfortable too, although we've gotten stares, we've gotten called at. I mean,
but they're a little different. I feel like it's a little different the way people look at us. My family's from Philly, so going there, I've never felt discriminated against or things like that. So people just, I guess, are more aware, but they don't make us feel like aliens. I feel like sometimes they just stare at me, and for so long, it's okay to glance, but to the point where it's like, okay, I don't feel comfortable here. I need to leave.
Yeah, and I think people also have a stereotype of what queer couples look like, and I don't know that we always fit that stereotype. So I think there's a different level of interest, and not necessarily positive interest, maybe sometimes. But I think also too, speaking about threats, one thing that we're passionate about just researching and advocating for is, Black trans people are killed at a really high rate. So there's been more murders of Black trans women in 2020 over the past however many months, I don't know, what month is it?
Yeah.
Than there were in 2019. So, in the whole year of 2019, in the first 7 months of 2020, more Black trans women were killed. So these rates are going up, so we think about things are becoming welcoming in some ways, but we also know a lot of these protections are being taken away. And again, this all trickles down from the top. So who's our president?
Yeah, who's emboldening these people to discriminate and hate? So.
Thanks.
I know too, just some of the other issues that are of concern. I mean, concerns about immigration, where people are more discriminated against and may be here to seek asylum because their countries aren't welcoming at all. The prison system with incarceration that LGBTQ plus people, especially people of color, are disproportionately likely to be arrested and incarcerated. There continues to be housing discrimination, even though the laws say no, but there still are. And I think the school systems, and Delaware has done a good job. The United Way has taken leadership with their Pride Council in working with elementary through high school to reduce bullying and harassment. But I think a concern, I think, Liz, when you and I were talking ahead of the we were preparing for today, you said even school board elections matter, that we need to look at how people running for that position and how they're going to respond to concerns of children and young people who may just be in that questioning stage, but need the freedom and flexibility to have that, to have a safe space.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's, but again, especially living here, like I think when I like voted in New Jersey, for example, or in New York, I maybe didn't pay as close attention because I assumed, you know, people were maybe more progressive or more maybe left leaning and would have my interests in mind. But now living here, like when you're in the thick of it, I mean, I think, you know, we pay attention to all the amendments, all, yeah, school board nominees. I mean, the judges especially. I mean, all of that really, really matters.
Mhm.
We've covered a lot. Anything that the two of you want to add before we open it up to our friends for comments or questions?
No, I mean, I don't think so. I think the one maybe thing I would add, it seems like you know, your church, from what y'all have told me, mom and dad, and from what it seems like here, all these people, is that, you know, you have a welcoming faith community. You know, but I think there's simple ways of doing that. So government is important, the elections are important, but then it's also important that we create, you know, safe spaces in churches, of course in the home, but also even in private schools, right? Because private schools can also make up their own rules. And so it's really just, yeah, trickling down everywhere. But it seems like y'all are doing a great job.
Well, thank you.
It's all because of us, of course, you know.
Yeah.
Questions or comments from friends who are joining us this morning? Yes, Margaret Ann?
So I'm so glad you brought up the idea of private schools, because for every private school out there that does set up barriers for the gay and lesbian community, I think there are also those who are very welcoming. I happen to teach at a private school, and it's one of the things that I don't want to say we pride ourselves on, because that would be a little bit too self-serving, but we are very open to not only people of all gender identities, but also races and religions. And so it's something that I find actually a great benefit of working at the particular private school where I work. I work at a Quaker school, so that's fine. And I'm also very aware of, as we all get it, that after a certain age, sometimes it's really hard to change habits. And the idea of pronouns is something that I have been working diligently to change for the past 6 or 7 years, especially as I have several students who are using different pronouns than what one would assume. I've had a couple of trans students, and it's a constant effort that I think is so worth it. And I'm grateful that you gave us some strategies for saying, so if you make the mistake, just apologize and don't over apologize. And very specifically in my field, I have stopped saying women sing this part and men sing this part. I now say sopranos and altos, you're going to sing this, tenors and basses, you're going to sing that. And that has been the hardest thing to change, because things are so ingrained. I also think that, yes, we happen to be privileged enough to live in an area of Delaware that is more progressive, that is more tolerant of these things. I worry when I look at things that happen further south in our state. And I think it's very easy for us to become complacent. And I would just want us to guard against that even though, and I just heard this somewhere else the other day, even though we think our vote doesn't matter, I still think every vote matters regardless of where it's made. So sorry, that's not really a question. That's just sort of thank you and affirmation of your things you're saying.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing.
Also, I want to point out, I was in men's chorus in high school. So there's another reason to say just the voice part. I was a tenor.
We no longer do that either. In fact, our all-state ensembles, we used to have a mixed choir and a women's choir, and we have changed it to be mixed choir and treble choir. We changed that about 5 years ago.
That's great. That's awesome. So good to hear.
And also just to share, I know you mentioned just saying women's and men's, there's ways to use more inclusive terms. So instead of ladies and gentlemen, you can use everyone, you can use folks, you can use y'all, you can use friends. There's just a lot of different ways that you
Use
can
guys.
or not, because guys, but
You're right. Don't use
don't
that
use
one.
that.
Don't use guys. Use.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, but
because I teach at a Quaker school, friends has been my go-to, and it's
Yeah.
a good thing.
Absolutely.
Are we on? Others this morning? Mac.
Yeah, I'm a tenor and in my choir. I was just interested. I have family in North Carolina, and I don't know why anybody would want to move to North Carolina, especially especially because they're so conservative. So I was wondering, why did you choose to go there?
A great question. So I have been working in higher ed for about 9 years now. I recently got my master's degree and decided that it was time for me to move out of Florida, which I'd been living for about 8 to 9 years. So I was open to a new opportunity. But also I've always worked at predominantly white institutions and have been around, my communities have been predominantly white. So I feel like I'm more of a service for students of color at predominantly white institutions. But this area, honestly, it's challenging me. I thought I was ready. But every day we have tractor trailer signs as big as tractor trailers that say Trump on it. So I see that every morning on my way to work. And that scares me, honestly. But I do feel like I'm here for a reason and a purpose. But I don't think my time we aren't going to be here very long. Yeah.
No, we do like the hiking and the mountains, and the leaves are beautiful right now. But I'm only here because she's here. So,
And that's the honest truth.
we keep asking my dad to find us a place in Wilmington.
And I keep offering and you don't come home. So Noble.
Noble has a question. Yeah.
Yeah, Noble.
Oh, you're muted.
Can you hear me?
Ken now.
I have a question, particularly for Clarinda. She's from Philadelphia. I'm from suburban Philadelphia, Chester, and I've been in Presbyterian Church for a long time, but my roots are in the Baptist Church. Part of the reason I'm in the Presbyterian Church is because of the issues we're discussing here. Part of my disappointment in the Black church is that in my day, these issues were never discussed. My question to you is, have you seen any change in this? Are Black churches beginning even to discuss this topic at all? Are Black churches becoming welcoming more so than when I was there years ago?
That's a great question. And honestly, I grew up Baptist as well. And my mom and my grandma, they are in church every Sunday, virtually now. But I decided not to attend church anymore because I never felt welcome there. But I think that also is rooted in just Black families and Black communities as a whole. I don't think they're very as accepting as a lot of other churches in general when it comes to being a member of the LGBTQ community. In a lot of ways, I know we talked about intersectionality, but I feel like I'm discriminated, like there's homophobia when it comes to the Black community. I get that a lot. And then when it comes to the white community, I'm discriminated against because of my Blackness. So I've never really found a place that feels safe. I'm very spiritual, but I've never found a church where I honestly felt welcome. And I would go with my mom for Mother's Day as like, just to make her happy, more so appeasing to her. But I literally never felt safe or welcomed into the Black community when it comes to church in general.
Have you discussed this with your mother or your family members or members of the church?
That is so great, Mr. Noble. Actually, I haven't. And so that's something I'm actually working through with my family to be more open. I'm in a place where even talking about my relationship with Liz is still a little iffy and touchy. So it's just something that runs deep. It's like our family, they don't discriminate per se, but we just don't talk about it. And I think that's a part of like that Black culture, and it's rooted in, I don't know, us just kind of, we're fine. We're not going to talk about it. We don't need counseling. We don't need these things. We're going to be okay. Let's pray about it. That's kind
of. Lyle, you have a comment or a question, and then we'll go to David, and then we'll conclude. So Lyle.
Yes, let me unmute. Okay. I'm looking for a specific thing just for my general knowledge. Please give me a quick and simple definition of queer. I really have never had anyone give me an accurate definition of queer. The
Yes.
other letters all have specific understanding.
And so actually we have, I don't know if we have time, but I have a really great video that's about 3 minutes that I wanted to share, but we can share it in our resources. But queer, I know not everyone loves it, but honestly, the best way that I explain it is kind of like the N-word for Black folks. It's like we kind of reclaimed that term, right? And so it's honestly a term of resilience and resistance versus a negative or derogatory term. For other, or like people use words like faggot and things like that. So I know that there was that derogatory term that came with it, but now we've kind of reclaimed it. So if you look at it, it's actually since the Stonewall riots, when they were like, we're here, we're queer, we're not going anywhere. And so just that reclaiming, where again, a lot of people don't like it, even with the N-word. I know I don't like the N-word, but I know some people use it to reclaim their existence and their resistance and things like that. And so that resource that we have for you, like I said, it's 3 minutes, and I think it'll give you the entire history of that term in a quick 3-minute video.
Yeah, it's an umbrella term. I mean, if I don't use the term really bisexual or lesbian that often. Like I would say queer, and also because I'm sort of new to the community. So the Q, I like that the Q in LGBTQ plus is queer and questioning. I think it leaves a lot of space, just not to say I'm this way or that way. It leaves a lot of space for people to explore. Even if they're in the community but not entirely sure which label to use yet.
I see.
Did that help?
Yes, that's a nice update for me, because when I was a teenager and actually beginning my college years, I would say, well, that guy's a different fellow or whatever. And somebody would say, yeah, he's queer. Mm-hmm. And I said, and then I realized that meant that the person was homosexual. Mm-hmm. So,
and it was derogatory.
And it was derogatory in the beginning. And so when it comes in LGBTQ, now add on IA, I wondered somebody give me a clear definition of that term. And you just did. You just helped me. Thank you.
No problem. And just to give another quick example, I didn't realize that certain people didn't like that term until I had a therapist. And when I identified to her that I'm queer, she said she didn't like the term and she didn't want me to use it in our session anymore. And I thought that was unfair. I was paying her, but also, I decided that wasn't the therapist for me.
David, you get the last question or comment.
Okay, so let's wrap these up. There's also, some generational thing with queer. And I think it's becoming something more that youth are more likely to be acceptive of, to the point that in particular, they're reclaiming it from even more recent language of, 10, 12 years ago. Kids would just say, oh, that's so queer, just meaning that's stupid, and I think people are reclaiming it from that as well. It also has the nice thing of being gender neutral, where gay is so associated with gay men. And if you say gay woman, then to some people that's oxymoronic. So instead of having to say gay and lesbian, as soon as you say gay lesbian, then you have to do all the rest of them. So it does have something of a useful handle that way. And maybe in the next generation that will change. The other thing I wanted to say was take heart, North Carolina. The 538.com site has a 2-to-1 chance that Trump wins and Cunningham wins. So that's the odds there. Okay. Then for a final question, looking at you both as younger people and particularly involved with university life, what is the generational differences you're seeing? Do younger people get it more, or are they becoming complacent and saying, oh, gay people have had these rights as long as I've been alive, and so I don't need to think about this?
So I would say, honestly, I'm learning so much from this generation of students. And I feel like they're just like born leaders and activists, like things that I wouldn't have dared to say or people who I wouldn't have dared to stand up to. They're doing that right now. So I am always learning and growing just by having conversations with my students. It's really amazing. So I feel like they had it a lot easier, where it's been a lot easier for them to be open about who they are and their sexual orientation and their gender identity. Again, we're embracing these things. So I just feel like it's just a whole different ball game now. They're very open. There's a lot more resources available. They are all embracing their identities. They want to learn more about each other's identities. It's a beautiful thing. So I think it's definitely more open and accepting nowadays.
Yeah. Well, and they have, I mean, teachers like Margaret, who are aware of these things and really making an effort to make all people feel included. And so that matters. And, even like young generations, like, so, our nephew, for instance, who I think my dad was just laughing about this, like when he was maybe 11 or 12, like he was like, Papa, we're all bi, like everyone's bisexual in our class, and it was just like no big deal. And maybe he didn't necessarily know what that meant or if he was bi or not, but the fact that he was just saying it like it's no big deal. I'm 11 and this is like just a thing. I think it's really cool to see. It's very inspiring to see. And even though it is very conservative here, we are really impressed with there's a lot of queer white people, but there's a lot of like queer people on campus. And so when we first came here, we were very impressed by that.
Well, thank you both so much. You're talking about the younger generation, and we invited you in part because you're the younger generation. So, life progresses, and we all at our own place. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Liz.
And we do have, if everybody, I know we're over time, we do have one last thing. It's a video. I'll share this resource if you can't stay, but I will play it now. This is why we in Delaware need to be aware of what's going on and not become complacent. So let me go.
Before you do the video, I so apologize for just like Zoom bombing. This has been fabulous and I'm just thrilled by all of it. We are going to cancel the in-person portion of the ordination this afternoon. Oh. So I would be so honored and delighted if all of you guys, if those of you who have the time could Zoom in at home and spread the word to others. And I really look forward to hearing, watching the video.
Sorry about that, Shannon.
It's in the weekly newsletter, Shannon.
You know what? It may be, it should be, we'll figure out what to do about that. Maybe somebody that's on the line can help me.
Allison says it is, but I've also just sent a message to Brenda asking if we can resend it with that message. So we'll see if we can manage that.
Maybe we can, I hope we can manage that. Okay. Thank you so much. Look forward to the video and thank you so much for this really important talk.
Thanks, Shannon.
Hi, I'm Selena Brett, a deacon at Newcastle Presbyterian Church in Newcastle, Delaware, and a regular speaker at Church on Main in Middletown, Delaware. Both of these churches are strong advocates and allies of our LGBTQI+ community, but it's a crime of hate vandalism perpetrated against Church on Main that I want to speak to you about for a few minutes today. My hope is to both raise your awareness to this event and to reinforce why organizations like More Light and your church are so important, especially given how politically divided our great nation is this contentious election year. Church on Main is a small congregation of about 25 with a huge brick sanctuary on Main Street in Middletown, Delaware. The Middletown civic offices are located literally behind the church. It is as downtown as it comes. Since June of last year, our Pride Month, this small congregation has boldly displayed our rainbow flag on the front of their sanctuary as a very overt and public statement of support in this largely conservative area. Over the course of the past year, this rainbow flag, our rainbow flag, has been torn down and shredded 4 times. Each time the flags were torn down, Church on Main bought new ones and put them back up. Recently, in support of many of our friends and loved ones and the greater movement against systemic racism in our country, Church on Main also added a Black Lives Matter flag. On August 16th, this hatred was escalated. For the 5th time, vandals tore down and shredded the flags. But this time, they burned them and they hung them on a traffic sign near the town high school. Jesus said this, "You've heard it said that an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, you turn to them and offer the other cheek. And if anybody wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well." Now, many misunderstand this verse as some sort of permission slip to allow evil to have its way with innocent. It is not. It is a verse that describes the unyielding ground that the innocent stand upon in the face of evil. Church on Main stands boldly on that unyielding ground, that rock that is Jesus Christ. Every time hatred slapped Church on Main in the face by tearing down these symbols of welcome and support and love to the LGBTQI+ and Black communities, they stood their ground, turned the other cheek, and displayed new flags. Most people are unaware of Church on Main's acts of ongoing Christian courage and their committed belief that all people are created equal in the eyes of God, and that the marginalized and victimized persons in our society deserve a safe sanctuary of welcome. Despite receiving press coverage from 2 news outlets and the church building location literally behind the town offices of Middletown, Delaware, this event has required an overt effort by myself and others to make people aware not only of this hate crime, but also of the courage surrounding this intentional act of hatred. More Light is an organization that is committed to bringing the light of Christ to communities everywhere. If you're watching this, your church is likely one that belongs to More Light or is thinking about becoming one. And we invest so much energy and effort in making sure that our church communities are aware of how to welcome our LGBTQI+ people and include us into your congregation. But we spend less time sharing just how important it is to be overtly open to the community about that welcome. The vandalism at Church on Main exemplifies why it is so very important that we are brazenly obvious in our welcome to all and firmly resolved that we will stand our ground in the face of hatred and opposition, or worse, complicit silence, whether from within our church or outside of it. Such resolve is a tangible statement of our Christian values, not only to the LGBTQI+ communities and the communities of color, but to the community at large. I hope that you'll share this story with those who need to hear it, particularly those in civic leadership. And I hope that if you are facing some sort of similar opposition, that you'll be encouraged by this small but Christ-empowered organization at Church on Main, this tiny congregation in Middletown, Delaware. Thank you.
So thank you all for being here. I think that video captures why this topic is important. And Bill and I have said, when this rotten pandemic is over, we want to go worship at Church on Main in Middletown, Delaware, and show our support there. And thank you all for your support of all that this church does and of the community at large. So
Thank you all.
have a great day, and we'll see you on Zoom for Shannon's ordination. All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.